At the end of the last section, we were adding the current user's information to our nav bar. So we no longer need the get default user import from our data file. And we can also get rid of the default current user import that we have here. If we head down to links, you'll see that we're using the default current user information here when we're linking to the username. Instead, now that can come from me.username, and the path is equal to /me.username for the class name. Now with that done, we're going to move on to adding the ability to create a new post for our users. So that means we're going to enable them to hit this add icon, and again we're going to open up a file dialog to allow users to select a media file to upload. We're going to use that same function, handle image upload, but we're going to make a larger image. We're going to resize the image to square proportions to about 500 by 500. We're going to see how to do that. But what's most important about this step is that we're going to give users a screen. We're going to give them the following screen to create a new post. So whatever they selected will be here on the right hand side. You see this kind of navigation up at the top where they can go back. They'll be able to write a caption, and to the left hand side of this they'll see their profile image, their avatar, and then underneath they can write their own location for wherever they made this post. And then finally, when they want to create this new post and associate it with their account, they'll hit the share button. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new component to be able to add a post. And this is going to be called the add post dialog. So within components, we're going to find post, and we're going to add a new file, add post dialog, that we haven't added before. Now, before we actually move on to building this out, to building out the structure of this, we want to take care of actually displaying a file dialog when we click on the add icon. So we're going to go back to navbar, and above the add icon we're going to add an input, and this will look familiar. It's going to have the type of file. It's going to be set, its inline styles is going to be set to display none. But the way that this is going to be opened, the file dialog is going to be opened, is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do this programmatically by using the add icon. So what we'll do first is we're going to create a ref for the input. Up at the top we'll use a ref, react.useRef, and this is going to be called our, doesn't need to be provided an initial value, this will be called our input ref, and we're going to put it on the input itself, the attribute ref set to input ref. Now add icon is going to use this. It's going to have an on click, and so when we click on it we're going to open the file input. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use that ref, open file input. We're going to say input ref.current.click, and that's what's going to open up the dialog. And again, we're going to need our onChange to trigger a function whenever a file is selected. And this is going to call another function, handle add post. So we'll make handle add post. It's going to get an event, and again it's going to get our file from event.target.files, the 0th element, and we want to store this in our state. This is because we want to pass this down to our add post dialog. This is just going to show up, the whole dialog is going to be displayed as a full screen dialog above everything that we see on the page. So we want to use state up at the top, and it'll initially be set to null. We're going to store it as media, and the setter will be set media. So here we want to set media, and we also want to show our add post dialog. So we're going to create a set add post dialog, set that to true, and it's going to control a piece of state called show add post dialog. Setter again was set add post dialog. Initially it'll be false, but you might be able to see where I'm going here. We want to, above the hidden component, show the add post dialog. If this value is true, then we want to display the add post dialog component. Now we haven't created that yet, so we want to import React up at the top, and we're going to be writing this entirely from scratch. So right now I just want to return a span, and we're going to export default at the bottom, add post dialog, and make sure that we can import it for our nav bar, within our nav bar, and we want to pass down to it the media, and we also want a means to close this. We want a back button. We want to add a back button so we can close the add post dialog if we need to. So let's make a function handle close, and that'll be passed to this handle close prop. And what is this going to do? Well, handle close is just going to call set add post dialog and pass in a value of false to hide it. So here within add post dialog, we want to destructure media and handle close for now. Now I don't know if this will be easily visible, so we just want the console log up at the top open, and save everything just to make sure that things are working as expected. So when we hit the add icon, we see our dialog open up, we select an image, and we see open, and we have the span up at the top here. I'll refresh to hide that. So let's build this out, but let's take a step back before we do that, and let's think about what post data we want to store. Let's think about our table that we want to add here, and more importantly, how are we going to associate the user data from the user table with this new table that we're going to be creating for posts. Well, first let's go ahead and create this post table. It'll have the table name of posts, and it's going to have the following fields. We'll again have a column name of ID, type UUID, and gen random UUID for its default value. We'll have a media column where it will be set to text. That will reference the URL that we get from Cloudinary when it's uploaded. Then we have a caption associated with the image, and that's going to be of type text. Then we're going to have the user ID. Now, why do we need the user ID? Well, this is the key to associating a given user, the current user that's logged in, with a given post. We want those two to be connected. We want there to be a relationship between the two. And that's why we need to include the user's ID on the post that we're creating. So this is going to be of type UUID. Then we're going to have the location, which will be of type text. And finally, created at. This is when it was created, and it's going to help us do important things like sort our posts according to when they were created, so we can get the most recent posts up at the top of our feed. And this is going to be a timestamp, and it's going to have a default value of now. So once again, the primary key is going to be the ID of the post, and we'll add the table. Now here in Hasura, we're going to figure out a way to establish a relationship. You'll see that there's a relationships tab here for each one of our tables. How do we connect the two? Well, I mentioned that the key to this was the fact that we're going to need to provide a user ID for each one of our posts that are created to be able to link it to our users. Now, to be able to tell Hasura about that, to tell Hasura to use the user ID and to associate that user data with our post and vice versa, we're going to need to set up a relationship. And we're going to start with posts first. Actually, we're going to start on the users table. That'll be a little bit more straightforward. So we can understand that for every one user, there can be as many posts as we want. It's a one-to-many relationship, and in Hasura terms, we'd call that an array relationship. So we want to go to the relationships tab for users, and we want to configure this manually, and it's going to be a relationship type of array. Now the relationship name for this is going to be posts. For users, we're relating to the post table, and we're going to reference the public schema. That's going to be the default. You don't have to worry about that. And the table will be posts. We're referencing the post table from users. But we want the ID here, the post ID, to reference the user ID. Okay? So it's pretty easy to read here. So the post for each post, the user ID is going to be associated with a given user's ID. The user ID that we stored for a given post is going to reference back a user. And now, since we've got this array relationship set up, we can go to the opposite table and set up an object relationship. For every relationship that we set up, if you set up an array relationship, you're going to need to set up an object relationship on the opposite table. So on the post table, we need to set up an object relationship. So we had a one-to-many. This is a many-to-one relationship. We want an object relationship, and this is just going to be called user. Don't be disconcerted if this doesn't make sense just yet. It's something that you can review in the Hasura documentation at hasura.io/docs. But generally, it's something that you'll get used to as we practice this throughout the process of setting up these different relationships. And it's pretty simple to read once we actually have created them. It's not always so straightforward when we're setting them up, but we can review them and then edit them as we need. So we want, since we're on the post table, we want to reference the table users. Users from user ID to ID. That's right. Okay, good. So this is a many-to-one relationship. All of the posts that have a given user's ID are just going to reference one user with that specific ID. So now that we've got that established, we're going to be able to easily perform a mutation where we can create a given post and it's going to be linked back to our user and vice versa. Now before we get started building out our dialog, there's one thing I want to bring your attention to, and that is the ability to format text for a given caption. We want the ability for users to format their text, meaning we want them to be able to write on multiple lines. And note that currently, you might have noticed how we've set up the feed post component and the post component. We're using the property dangerously set inner HTML for the typography component here for the caption. So we're going to need a way to turn what the users typed into the caption text field and turn that raw text into formatted text with the help of HTML. We need to serialize our text into HTML, in other words. And there's not a convenient way to do that with just Material UI alone or with React alone. We need to resort to another library to help us out. And fortunately, there is a great library in the NPM package Slate.js, and it's, as you can see here, it's a completely customizable framework for building rich text editors. Our needs are going to be pretty simple here, but really it provides everything that you might want for a rich text editor. And fortunately, it comes with a lot of examples. Before we start building out the dialog, we're going to take a look at just a simple version, a simple demo of how to use Slate for plain text in the documentation. So we'll take a look at a walkthrough for plain text. Let's see if I can find this. This will work well. This will work fine for our needs. So we just need to get started. We're going to need to install 3 packages, and those are Slate, Slate React, and Slate History. So if you want to follow along from the documentation, you can see the link up here, but really we just need to do a few things. We're going to need to import these two lines. We're going to need to add these two lines where we're importing create editor from Slate and importing Slate editable and with React from Slate React. We'll add that up at the top of add post dialog. And we can remove the comment. The next thing that we'll do is we're going to add this line here. We're going to create a Slate editor object that won't change across renders. That's why we're using the use memo hook. And I'm just going to say react.useMemo so we don't have to import that as a named import. And additionally, we're going to create some state to store the value of the editor. So we'll add use state, and the state variable will be value and the setter set value. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and add all of this where we have Slate, this Slate component, and to it we pass the editor stored in the variable through the editor prop, the value, the state value passed to its own prop, and then an on change here. And then within it we have editable. So we're just going to copy all of that. I'm going to comment it out for now. I'm just going to paste it all up here, and I'll comment it out, and we'll use it when we write out all of the JSX for our component. But I am going to set the initial value of useState for our useState hook. This is going to be set to initial value, a variable above, and this is going to be an array, and each one of these objects that are going to be within what's stored in the state variable, these are called nodes. So these are going to consist of what type of HTML we want to create to serialize to. So the first one will be a type of paragraph, and for the children, we're going to have any children nodes. The children will be an array with array of objects, which will have just the text property set to an empty string for now. If this is confusing at the moment, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it, and we're going to see how easily we're going to be able to update state from what we've typed into the Slate editor, update state, and then serialize that or convert this data into raw HTML. But right now our focus is going to be creating the same appearance for this component like we saw in the image. So the first thing we're going to do is use styles from Material UI, import use styles. We're going to be writing all of our styles in this component. We can export it, we can put it within our dedicated styles file later, but we want to, my mistake, it should be make styles from Material UI. We want to make styles where we can get the theme and then return an object, and then we can call this use add post dialog styles. Now we're going to have a style for our app bar, and it's going to consist of the rules position relative, background, FFF important, color will be black and important, display will be set to flex, justify content will be space between, and the height will be 54 pixels important. Next one for the toolbar, where the min height will be 54 pixels and important. And after that, our title, where flex is going to be set to 1 and font weight 600. Within that, one called paper, where display is set to flex, align items set to flex start, and then for every item within it, so we'll use and then the children selector, an asterisk for all of them. We'll set the margin to theme.spacing1. After paper, we'll have a rule of editor of flex 1. One called avatar large, where the width is theme.spacing set to 7, and the same for the height of the avatar. Underneath that, we'll have one for the input, where padding is 10 pixels important, and font size 14 pixels important. After the input, one called root, where the border will be 1 pixel solid, E6, 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 and the margin top to 10 pixels important. After that, underline, and these are all kind of specific to Material UI to remove the underline underneath the input for the location. We're going to use and the before pseudo element, and within that role we'll set border to none and important, and we can copy this a few more times. Apply this rule for next after border none important, and then for the hover and before, just like that. So what we can do now, if you want to make this file a bit cleaner, we can first of all call use add post dialog styles and get back classes, but we can also put this at the very bottom, this variable at the very bottom of our styles file, and export it. And we don't need make styles anymore, so we'll import use add post dialog styles from // to folders app styles. And now we're going to be able to write out all of our JSX with the appropriate classes. So we're going to start with the dialog, and that will be full screen, open, and we're going to have on close set to handle close from props. Then we'll have an app bar, and it'll have the class name classes.appbar. Then toolbar, all of these components will be importing, and the class name classes.toolbar. Then for the back button, I'm going to import a Material UI icon. This will be called arrow back iOS, and we'll just add directly on an on click and set it to handle close. And after the icon in the toolbar, we're going to have a typography component, and this not create typography, but just typography with a line set to center, the variant body1, and the class name classes.title. And it's going to have the text new post. And after that, after typography, we'll have a button, and this is to submit or share the post, so we'll give it the text share, and it's going to have the color of primary, and for the class name we'll set it to classes.share. Then underneath the app bar we'll have a divider, Underneath that, we'll have our paper component, the class name of classes.paper. Then we'll have an avatar, and its source is going to come from me. So we'll go up and grab me from the user context. It's going to have a source set to me.profile_image. Then we're going to include all of the JSX that we commented out, our slate component, and editable as a child of it. Now for editable, we're going to style this a little bit. This is where users are going to be able to edit their caption, and it'll have the class of classes.editor, and we're going to give it the placeholder text of write your caption. Then underneath that, underneath slate, we'll have another avatar, and this is going to be for the media itself. So the source is going to be accepting the media file, and the way that we can create a preview of that is by saying url.createObjectURL and pass in media. And the class name here will be avatar large, and the variant will be square. Then underneath that, we'll have our text field for our location, where users can input their location. And this is going to be full width, and the placeholder will be the text location, and we're going to put a little icon on the left-hand side of it as the start adornment, with using input props and the property start adornment. And that's going to have an input adornment component around it, and within that a pin drop component, a pin drop icon that I might have to import manually. Then finally, we'll add an onChange, and we're going to create an inline arrow function where we take the event, and we're going to set the location to event.target.value. So I'll make some location state as well. Now at this point, I believe we can save everything and at least take a look at what we have. So let's make sure there's no errors. So once again, we'll select an image. And great, we see our preview of it on the right-hand side. We can write our caption, which we'll see how to serialize to HTML in just a second. We have location underneath, but that input, but I believe I forgot to include the class for it. So it should have the class name, following class names that I'm going to include on input props. Remember, we had the classes object to style some inner properties, some inner classes. The first one's root, and that's going to be set to classes.root. Then one called input from classes.input. And then another called underline set to classes.underline. And that should finish our styling there. And now that we see that everything's in place, we're going to need to convert what's typed in here to actually formatted text. So when we write a new line, the main serializing that we're going to do is we want to add a break in the HTML whenever someone adds a return, whenever someone writes a new line. So that's going to enable them to have a formatted caption and look a lot nicer. So we're going to create a helper function for that we're going to put in our utils folder, and we're going to just call this file serialize. And we could call this serialize to HTML, but let's just leave this at serialize. And we're going to need one more package for this. We're going to need to install a package called escape-html. So once that's installed, we're going to import up at the top of serialize one called text, something called text from Slate, to determine when we have text, and a text node that is. And we're also going to import escape-html from escape-html. So let's make a function called serialize, and I believe all of this can be taken from the documentation here. A serialize, you can just search for serializing to HTML, and you can copy this entire bit of code right here. We don't need the node import, but you can copy all of this if you want, but we don't really need as much here because we don't have instances where we have a quote. We just are going to have paragraphs. We're not even going to have links, although that's something that you could add if you wanted formatting for links. So this function is just going to accept a node. If it's text, we're going to use the escape HTML function. Otherwise, we're going to try to switch according to the node type and put all of the children within a certain HTML tag. Now, for us, instead of including a paragraph within a set of paragraph tags, I'm actually going to do what Instagram does and just separate all the children, that is the text, separate it with a line break, just like this. And that's really all that we need to do in terms of converting our text into raw HTML. So let's make sure that we export default serialize and import that back within add post dialog. And this is going to be called whenever we submit, whenever we hit the share button and submit our post. Namely, it's going to accept what we have stored in value that the Slate component is taking care of updating for us. So what's the final step here? How do we share our post? Well, we're going to need to perform a mutation, and we'll write that in just a second, but for the time being, let's create a function in add post dialog called handle share post, and we don't need to pass it anything, but we want to keep track of when we're submitting the post so that we don't have the user submit twice. So let's create a Boolean state variable called submitting and set submitting that we're going to connect to the submit button, or the share button, I should say. And so here disabled is going to be set to submitting. We could also call this is submitting, but submitting is fine. At the beginning of this function, when we're sharing a post, we want to set submitting to true to disable it. And next we need to handle uploading our image. We can use the same function, handle image upload, in order to take care of that. So actually first let's just add an on click to our share button. Handle share post. And once again we'll import handle image upload. If it will do that for me, but I guess not, so let's do that manually. Import handle image upload. Now we do need to change one thing about this. As I mentioned, we want to upload every image in a very precise way. We want it to be formatted in a square format. We want it to be converted to a 500 by 500 pixel image. So that standardizes our images. It makes sure that they're the same size, and therefore they're going to appear in a very similar way whenever a user's taking a look at one of another user's posts or their own post. So we need to perform what's known as a incoming transformation for Cloudinary. So we've done all the work of adding a upload preset. So we're going to go back to our Cloudinary dashboard, hit the gear icon, go to upload, and we're going to need to edit the upload preset that we created. We'll scroll down to that area and edit the one that we made. We're going to need to go to the upload manipulations area and go to incoming transformation. We'll edit this. We want to resize and crop the image that's coming in. So we want to set the width of it to 500 and the height of it to 500. We want to set both of those. We can do things like changing the quality. We can change the corner radius if we want, but we don't want to do that. We just want to set it to a strict 500 by 500. And once that's selected, we'll hit OK. Now we're going to need to save this, and we can go back, and within handle share post, we can await handle image upload, and we'll pass in media, that entire file. We'll make this an async function. We'll get back our URL and put it in a variable. Then we want to create our variables for the mutation that we want to execute. Now we have to think about this mutation. What do we want to do here? Well, let's think about what we want to add when we perform this mutation. Let's go back to our table, to our post table, and looking at these different rows, we're going to need, or different columns, we're going to need to provide the media, the caption, the user ID, and the location. The created at and ID will be generated for us automatically. So we need to make our mutation. So we'll make a new mutation, and this will be one where we insert posts, and we want to provide the user ID, the media, location, and caption. And we don't need to return anything, so we'll just provide affected rows, and we're going to call this create post. And we'll again add user ID of type UUID and required. All of these things are going to be required, or that is to say not null. Media will be a string and required, location a string and required, and the caption a string and required. And pass all these values in. Okay, so let's copy all of this and add a new mutation in the mutations file. We'll name this create post, and then back in add post dialog, let's use a mutation, create post, and we'll get back our mutate function of the same name, and we'll collect all the variables. The user ID we set to the current user ID, so we can destructure that from our user context that we're using. Location will be set to the state variable location. Caption will be one where we call the serialize function, and it's going to need to accept an object where the property children is set to value. And then media, the last argument, media, is going to be set to URL. And finally, we can call create post, pass in the variables, going to await the result, then finally set submitting to false, and lastly, we can do a full reload with window.location.reload. That's what I'd prefer to do. It's fine if you really just want to, call handle close and close the dialog. Now let's give this a shot. We'll save everything, save all of our files, make sure we don't have any errors, and we'll try adding a new post. Select an image, and we can provide a location. And we'll write some caption. And then we'll hit share. And if we take a look at our data, we go to posts, we see one new post, one new row here, and it looks like all of our data is added correctly. We see that our HTML was serialized properly, or our text was converted into HTML. We have all of the data, and if you look at the very end, you'll see the user. You can view the user that it's connected to. And if you want, we can now query for all of the posts. And of course, we can get the ID, the location, the media. But right now, you'll see that there is a user field where we can get, stuff like the username who made the post. And finally, one last thing that I want to check is to make sure that the new post that's uploaded has an image that is 500 by 500, and it looks like that was scaled correctly. So great work. There's a lot to take in here, but with the ability to add posts and finding out now about relationships and how to set them up, we've come a long way, and we're going to be able to build out the rest of our application a lot quicker and add all of the additional bits of data very easily now that we've got the two main sets of data out of the way, and how to relate a newly added post to an existing user. It's going to be very easy to take what we know and do the same for comments, for likes, for saved posts, etc.